And this year, today, is about Kassettentäter. We try to translate it, and the closest term maybe is tape delinquents. So it's a term that was made up by the people who created this scene of tape music. Of course, the scene has existed everywhere, all over the world, where there were tape recorders. But in Germany, I think it had a very strong impact. Yeah. So I will give you a short introduction to the audio cassette tape, and then I will pretty soon jump into what I and lots of other people created at that time. I also have some interviews. One is with Alfred Hilsberg. He is for Germany important guy who ran and still runs the label Zickzack, which was very influential since the end of the 70s, especially between 79 and maybe 89 or something like that. And another guy who is also here as an interview partner is Frank A. Schneider. He wrote a book called Als die Welt noch unterging, when the world was still on the edge of downfall or something like that. And this book is covering a lot of the cassette scenes, but also the underground music scene of the same era and time. Okay, so let's start. Audio tape has existed since 1935, but until the early 1960s it remained a niche, expensive and problematic format. In 1962, Philips, the big company, invented the first affordable compact audio cassette that was designed for dictaphone use within offices in the beginning. When it was first unveiled at the Internationale Funkausstellung, Berlin Consumer Electronics Trade Fair, also nice. In 1963, the cassette caused a sensation. It was small, lightweight and modern.
Philips had several product divisions, 10, 12, and every product division was concentrated on certain products and a certain market. And the electroacoustic product division was concentrated on sound and images for professional market. For instance, film projectors, television cameras, dictaphone machines, public address systems, audio recorders, etc. And the guys who worked on the cassette were located in Vienna, and it's there where the cassette was developed.
In the 50s?
In the 50s and 60s. And then in that negotiation about the licensing, Philips has won because they give the standards free. And that was a reason for the Japanese to work with the Philips standard, and that is part of the success of the audio cassette after 1965.
Yeah, this guy Wim Langenhoff is a very interesting character. He worked for Philips, and but also had his own Institute of Affordable Lunacy, Institute for Betalbare Wahnsinn in Dutch. And he was part of a really great improvising and performance band called the New Electric Chamber Music Orchestra. And it was not very famous outside of the Netherlands, but inside they had really crazy performances where they put everything on stage, from EEG machines to bicycles and motors and all kinds of instruments, electronic stuff, and like big mess. So it's an interesting character anyway. On this release here, there's a tape also included next to a CD, and on the tape there's a like 16-17 minutes feature about Wim Langenhoff, where he tells his whole story, also his strange sound and light experiments that he made with people. 1964 saw mass production of music cassettes begin in Hanover, Germany. However, the sound quality of cassettes was not good enough to be seriously considered for music recording until further advances in tape materials. In the late 1970s, companies such as Sony began manufacturing high-quality portable cassette players, boom boxes, and car tape players. The most interesting feature about the cassette player was probably its record button. Listeners were no longer passive consumers of music, but active participants within the recording process. The cassette recorder motivated children as well as adults to experiment with audio at home. Here's an early example of my brother and me. As a result, the format sparked huge social changes in people's listening habits and quickly became a highly interactive and democratic audio format. Even answering machines and dictaphones were used in creative ways to record poetry, dreams, love and hate messages.
Ja, ich dachte, ich kann nicht gut sprechen und so grüße ich dich. Ich hatte gerade eine Minute Zeit, mit dir zu reden. Den ganzen Tag immer nur gehetzt und nonstop unterwegs gewesen und dann denke ich an dich und will mit dir zwitschern von Dach zu Dach, von Wolke zu Wolke, von der Schattenseite der Erde zum Sonnenaufgang auf der anderen Halbkugel des Stadtteils St. Georg, wo wir noch.
So, of course, the music wasn't on the answering machine, but I added it later on and it worked perfectly. In the late 70s, the German music scene was shaken up by a virtual explosion of new bands that sounded radically different to anything that had come before. They played music that was experimental, playful, absurd, minimalist and astute, with lyrics that were sung or more commonly screamed exclusively in German. It's also not easy to understand it in German, by the way. So he's singing, ich bin Werkzeugmacher, I'm a creator or a constructor of tools. Do you know what that is? You can kill people with that, Zyankali, stuff like that. So, yeah. Great band from Berlin, Kosmonautentraum. They were part of the Genius Dilettantes, the Geniale Dilettanten. The spirit of this new movement, later branded Neue Deutsche Welle by the industry, more or less, but the term came actually from Alfred Hilsberg, or actually another guy, but Alfred made it famous, and then he was really angry about it later on because the industry picked it up like a label for their marketing. Emerged from a collision between the self-confident attitude of punk, the legacy of Germany's electronic avant-garde and the belief in the imminence of an atomic apocalypse. In his book Als die Welt noch unterging, when the world was still on the verge of downfall, Frank A. Schneider describes this despair as a joyful dance on the edge of the volcano.
For a short moment, a situation occurred that sociologists call anomie. Emil Durkheim called it like that. That's a situation in which the old order went down, it lost its powers, and a new order is not yet here. It's a kind of cultural anarchy.
In this cultural vacuum, under the looming threat of a possible nuclear war and squeezed between opposing ideologies, everything became possible. Arts, music, literature, film, and humor had to adapt to the monstrosity of the political momentum. In 1979, Alfred Hilsberg, I mentioned him before, founded his notorious label Zickzack, which released records by groundbreaking bands such as Die tödliche Doris, Einstürzende Neubauten, and Palais Schaumburg. Hilsberg rapidly became a key figure in the booming German independent music scene.
There was something in the air which you can describe as a new energy. It was a start into a new era, a start in a new culture. It was the result of social conditions in Germany, the political decisions. It was the time when the German RAF, the terrorists, were active, and the reaction was fighting against them. And so everything came to a so-called stillstand. People were looking for a possibility to create a new self-determined way of living.
In 1980, the entire Federal Republic of Germany was just at the boiling point. A new form of home music is coming into existence, house music, but not the techno house music, but just house music at home. It had nothing to do with violin-playing children, scratchy sweaters, and welcomed relatives listening on the sofa, but rather combined the fierce and dark abyss of industrial society. Remarkably, it is the same industry that made the tools available to the raging youths. Cheap Casio keyboards, synthesizers, drum computers, and 4-track tape recorders. Suddenly anyone could acquire their own means of production to use in protest against the industrial forces. This polyphony of creative aggression rolling suddenly towards the industry bosses was not something the gentlemen electro-engineers could have foreseen. Not only the music, also the way that lyrics were constructed was completely new. Let's listen to an early tape track by Holger Hiller, the former singer and basic motor of the band Palais Schaumburg, a band from Hamburg. It's actually really funny to listen to this in this environment here. I think Holger would really like it. So the lyrics are, I say yes, I say no, I turn on, I turn off, my ego radiates, no, yes, turn me on, turn me off. Appalled rather than enthralled by this new expressionism, the record industry initially showed no interest in these groups. New platforms had to be set up in order to spread the virus. Small record companies like Zickzack and Atatak from Düsseldorf started to release music by these young artists who were springing up like mushrooms. However, not everyone had the possibility to release a vinyl record. So for the majority of amateurs, the audio cassette became the main medium for the distribution of their homemade music. Especially in smaller towns and villages that didn't have the cultural infrastructures and flow of information of the big cities, the tape scene flourished.
The virus spread from the big cities to the small cities, like always. But the interesting thing is that there are some small towns, like Limburg, which is a small town with, I think, 30,000 people living there, or even smaller cities like Farel. It was like 10,000 people living there, and it had like 30 bands. Of course, all of these bands consisted of the same people and their best friend or something like that, but they had the creative energy to form all these bands and think of all these stupid band names and ideas and concepts for bands.
Yes, there was also a scenery in smaller towns, even in villages, and there was a lack of communication between them and the big cities, and so they began to spread around their music, their creativity with cassettes. They sent cassettes to fanzines, they sent cassettes to a magazine like Sounds, and they often created a much more interesting music than big cities.
Halbleiterleitung nur bei hohen Temperaturen, Molekularbewegung setzt Elektronen frei. 4 Elektronen auf der Außenschale, 4 Elektronen auf der Außenschale. Halbleiterleitung nur bei hohen Temperaturen, Molekularbewegung setzt Elektronen frei. Halbleiterleitung nur bei hohen Temperaturen, Molekularbewegung setzt Elektronen frei. Setzt man Arsen oder Indium bei, so leiten sie besser. Eine Halbleiterleitung nur bei hohen Temperaturen, Molekularbewegung setzt Elektronen frei.
I wish I could translate this, but it's something like from a school book, I think, like semiconductors only. What's that? Conduct energy at high temperatures, molecular movements sets electrons free or something, and then rhythmically spoken.
Who was that?
There's a band called Comix. I have 2 brothers from the Schwarzwald, living in the middle of the Schwarzwald, and they always kept really secret, so nobody really knows what they look like. It was very hard for me to trace them, because maybe I can just mention this now. I put out, or I curated a release called Science Fiction Park Ulusser. This is put out by a British label called Finders Keepers, and it consists only of tape music like this stuff. And it took me half a year or longer to trace all the people there. So some of them were so shy or just didn't want to say who they are. It was really difficult to trace them down. The brothers were especially difficult because one of them is still living with their parents and the other is a printer somewhere in Stuttgart, but the first question he asked me is like, where did you get my number from? So yeah, a special species, especially in Germany, I think. Okay, so underground cassettes releases offered the best way to spread music without making compromises, and were usually released in editions ranging from 5 to 250 copies. They were distributed using a variety of methods, which included fanzines, classified ads, gigs, mail art networks, and just plain word of mouth. Now I have some images. This is, for example, by Andy Giorbino. This was an ad. Extreme mist. Sounds nice in English, but in German it means like extreme crab. He still exists. Now it's called X-Mist. So, but he's still distributing all kinds of stuff. I think he might be one of the really like 2 or 3 ones that survived. Kassetten Hitparade. Hitparade, you know. More to men's. Well, I'm sure you know this kind of aesthetics from your own. Oh, yes, comes next. Of course, the new tape movement needed a name, and it didn't take much time until a new term was coined.
There was even a special word that occurred for the do-it-yourself tape scenesters back then. It was Kassettentäter. That means something like tape delinquents, maybe tape delinquents, named after a sampler from Pforzheim. Pforzheim is a small, typical German town, and the word was used frenetically by the activists from the scene. They called themselves the Kassettentäter.
So that's how the term was coined. The 4-track tape studio became the medium of the collective unconscious, became the embrasure, the lighting rod and the magnetic witness to the fears of an imminent nuclear war. On top of that, most of the recordings were born without strategy or intention of commercial exploitation. They were eruptions out of the crater of a society that had reached a deadlock during the so-called German Autumn with its failed RAF movement, the Rote Armee-Fraktion. That was this terrorist organization that was especially active in the 70s. Everyone was waiting, but for what?
People all were encouraged by the fact that in England very creative scenery with punk began, and in Germany there was nothing. No, there was no real music culture, and people they did something for themselves. It was a method of surviving.
The conventional opinion that Germans should go down to the basement to laugh found here its practical application. In the home recording basement, one could pursue unobserved one's pent-up fears, frustrations, aggressions, and bizarre fantasies. The simple-mindedness with which frequencies were mistreated and lyric reminders were slashed into knees brought out a surprising originality. The new heroes were the amateurs of the electronic circuit. Their behavior was unpredictable and driven by impulsivity. Even telephone jokes were incorporated in tracks, as the following example proves.
Hallo? Wirklich? Bei Vogel? Hallo? Hallo? Hallo?
Kein Anschluss unter dieser Nummer. Kein Anschluss unter dieser Nummer.
Yeah. I very much like this conceptual approach. They really wait until the person hang up, until they play the loop again. I really
put their
like
phone number on it, attempted to call them.
yeah. That was very fashionable anyway at that time, just to put a phone number there, just to hope people would do whatever. You know. This is a tape called Die Brüderkassette, the tape of the brothers. So only brothers were allowed to send in a track that they produced together. It says, "We are brothers." And of course the two socks, yeah. In their freshly established home studios, the protagonists practice the new underground music, the, quote, undirected aggression of liberated sounds, as Frank A. Schneider puts it. Everything that isn't nailed or riveted down is used as an instrument. Baking trays, cartons, room lamps, toys, wooden flutes, whistles, cans, trays, record players, televisions, and doorbells.
I need some acoustic signal. Where can I get it? So, I can get it through running around with a tape recorder and recording outside sounds, field recordings. Or, okay, I have these toys that make noises back from my childhood days, which were like 5 years ago. Or I have like plastic trumpets or stuff like that. So everything, even if they were just humming around or slamming on some plastic buckets.
Yeah, out of the living rooms of the nation drones an obsession with noise, sparing not even the children. For example, 1983 saw in the outskirts of Hamburg what is probably unique in the history of music, a scene of experimental kids bands terrorizing their neighbors under assumed names like Universalanschluss, Universal Connection, intensive Styropor-Symbole, intensive Styrofoam Symbols, die egozentrischen Zwei, the egocentrical Two, der Leichenwäscher von Boberg, the corpse washer of Boberg, and rekonstruiertes Relativpronomen, reconstructed relative pronouns, but written wrong. So that is exactly what A. Schneider was saying about Limburg. So there were I don't know, 20 bands, but they consisted of the same 10 people. Here's some proof.
Eines Tages setzen sich 5 Chemiker zusammen, fassen den Plan, die Menschen zu beherrschen. Sie sind dabei, ein hochgefährliches Gemisch zu erfinden. Sie sind dabei, ein hochgefährliches Gemisch zu erfinden. Sie sind dabei, ein hochgefährliches Gemisch zu erfinden. Passt auf, denn irgendwann haben sie es geschafft. Passt auf, denn irgendwann haben sie es geschafft. Passt auf, denn irgendwann haben sie es geschafft. Zusammen, was denn den Plan, die Menschen zu beherrschen. Sie sind dabei, ein hochgefährliches Gemisch zu erfinden. Sie sind dabei, ein hochgefährliches Gemisch zu erfinden. Sie sind dabei, ein hochgefährliches Gemisch zu erfinden. Passt auf, denn irgendwann haben sie es geschafft. Passt auf, denn irgendwann haben sie es geschafft. Passt auf, denn irgendwann haben sie es geschafft.
Yeah, typical handmade music. It's true, the tempo is more punk in this piece, definitely. Yeah, there's some more images. This, some of them you can find over there. This was the first release of the egozentrischen Zwei. And this one, solo tape with 90 minutes of music. Intensive styrofoam symbols. Still wonder what this thing in the middle is. I think it's like from an electric circuit, self-built, and then frustrated, and then just putting all these cables together and now leaving the room. This was a sampler from the place where I come from, so all the bands that I mentioned before. And yeah, there was also fanzine, a tape fanzine, where new music was introduced. It's called Mitteilung an die letzte Generation, like a message to the final or last generation. And of course we were all interviewing ourselves, each other, like one was the reporter, the other was the band, you know. So here's a funny little excerpt of it where my brother, with whom I had this band, Universalanschluss, Universal Connector, is answering some questions to the interview.
Ja, und nun frage ich noch den Sänger Koso, ein sehr einfallsreicher Name, wo man sich sehr viel vorstellen kann.
And now I ask the singer Koso, by the way, a very inventive name. How would you classify your music?
Also unsere Musikrichtung
Well,
betiteln wir
Okay, what does the keyboard player have to say? Now I got it. Our musical direction is tearjerker. And have you had any gigs? How did it go and were you well received? Yes, I think we were well received, and as far as gigs go, we have had one in our living room. And how many gigs so far? Until now, only one. Okay, and now we listen to the song Quality of the State.
That was a song by that band. Here was like a catalog of the available tapes. Most of them were not produced in a higher edition than 2 or 3, like copied for friends. Of course, you didn't have to pay for them. And I tried to create a genealogy, so you get an idea of but it shows very clearly that a lot of people are interconnected. So that's me with my brother, with this band Universalanschluss, and I had this band with Stefan Mohr. He's nowadays one of the most important key figures in the German advertising company Jung von Matt. So he's really powerful. He just suggested recently to me to finance my records, which is really nice. Yeah, and then here the band Intensive Styrofoam Symbols together with him. He's a cousin. He worked for Universal later on. He was one of the guys who made the campaign for Rammstein, I think. So it's really crazy. Anyway, so yeah, interconnections, as you can see. And all together we're part of a project I had called Gelegenheitsexperimente, like temporary experiments where we just recorded in chaotic combinations. No. That's just to confuse you anyway. So the Kassettentäter were less interested in selling their work than connecting to like-minded musicians and exchanging tapes and ideas. Particularly in the former German Democratic Republic, audio tapes were the best means by which to distribute banned underground music and avoid the SED, that's the state party, so Sozialistische Einheitspartei Deutschland's quality control committees that decided which bands were allowed to play gigs and release records. It would take a whole other lecture to talk about all the underground scene of East Germany. There's a great release which I think will be re-released soon. That's called Spannung, Leistung, Widerstand, about East German magnetic underground. It's a book with 2 CDs. However, at some point, Zickzack received so many cassettes that they couldn't cope with it anymore. With the growing amount of tape productions, the artistic quality suffered, and at some point people lost their interest in tapes. Actually, at some point, only the ones who produced tapes were listening to tapes, so it became like a closed circle. Oh, there's more photos. Yeah, some live gigs.
Yeah, I was attacked by 20, 30, 40 cassettes coming in from all areas in Germany per day. It was from 77 until 1980. I got thousands and thousands of cassettes. For me, it came to an end with all these cassettes when I threw out 4,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 of these cassettes out of my window. I was happy to decide it like that.
Most of the people just threw it away because they said, okay, I moved 3 times, and the 3rd time I had to pull all these card boxes full of tapes to my car and then to my attic. I just threw it away. I never listened to that.
In March 2012, the production of audio tapes, cassette tapes, has been put to an end in the Western world. But already a few years before, the audio cassette had a revival. The effort involved in compiling tapes meant that there was an inherent awareness of time, and they were often listened to in their entirety. This is in contrast to today's digital music sharing habits of rapid jump cuts and short attention spans. For others, the cassette was a precious resource to record, exchange, and distribute alternative audio works. It became the first music sharing system that challenged the conventions and musical dictates of the recording industry. Actually, the mixtape has survived as a format. So, there's websites who celebrate the mixtape. And the idea, I think, behind it is also to put music in a new context and then create whatever message or different feeling with that. Until today, the daring and visionary spirit of the Kassettentäter lingers on. It became part of the German collective subconscious and is still haunting the underground music scene.
Why don't the squatters fuck Annette till she's numb? Why does F.J. Krüger lady look like the secret police so dumb? Why don't you go to the city to get your face beaten up silly? Why do I like my mother's curls better than the plastic new wave swells? Why does every stupid fraud show me there is no God? Why do you stand there so clever? The animal in you is there forever. When will the bustle of the 80s begin? Will art through butchering win? The handicap is, everyone thinks they can make it big. Everyone is just a gloating pig. Despair makes no amends. I am that I am what I am. And so on and so forth. I'm out of this turf.
Warum vögeln die Hausbesitzer Annette nicht krumm? Warum blickt F.J. Krüger wie ein Staatssicherheitsbubi ganz dumm? Warum gehst du jetzt nicht in die Stadt? Und jemand haut dir die Presse satt? Warum mag ich meine Mutter mehr? Als Plastik New Wave Schickeria her? Warum beweist mir jeder höllischen Spott? Es gibt keinen Gott, es gibt keinen Gott!
Ja, there was a piece by Georgie D. Die Kunst wird mal durch Abschlachten groß. And that's the end of it. Thanks a lot.